So we start with like, who are you? Like really, what is your purpose?
See
What
how
is
uncomfortable I got there? I was like, oh God, yeah, who are we? This is a big
who
one.
am I?
Hey everyone, I'm Morgan, co-founder and president of Primal Kitchen and host of the Primal Kitchen podcast. Today I'm chatting with Dr. Michael Gervais, best known for his role as psychologist to the Seattle Seahawks and high performance coaching for a slew of famous musicians, Olympians, and Fortune 100 CEOs. He specializes in optimizing human performance through the power of mindset. He's also the co-founder of Compete to Create, a mindset shifting digital platform he launched with Seahawks head coach Pete Carroll. I'm eager to chat with him today, learn more about the link between mindset and success. Before we dive in, a reminder that any and all opinions and views shared by hosts and guests of this podcast are the speaker's own and do not represent the view of Primal Kitchen or its affiliates or parent company. Did I say that fast enough? How are you?
Yeah. Hey, Morgan. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for including me in your community.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was just catching up with him before we started recording. We actually have a lot of personal connections in common. So I'm super excited to be sitting down with him on the professional athlete front, from football to surfing to Fortune 100 CEOs. There's a whole gamut of it. So tell us about your earlier career and how did you get here?
Okay. So I'll do a short version of something that is obviously much more textured than what I'm going to share, but I grew up and my first sport of choice, my first love in sport was surfing. And there's two types of surfing, as I know you'll recognize. One is free surfing and the other is competitive surfing. So under the free surfing conditions, like I could do it, like I grew up in California and I had a good command of myself. I'm not saying I was great by any means, but I could do it. And then come competition, I couldn't access it. The stuff that I knew I could do on a regular basis. And just to highlight that, I was 16 years old surfing it was about head high conditions. It was a competitive moment. There was only 3 people out, perfectly glass, 8 a.m. in the morning. And a gentleman, so I was surfing up in my class and a gentleman paddles by me and he says, he's older than me. And he says, Gervais, I surf out here every day with you. You got to get yourself together. He goes, I don't know what you're doing, but you got to stop worrying about what everyone's thinking about you. And I thought there for a minute and I was like, that's it. Like, one, how does he know it's in my head? 2, it's my mind. It's not my physical body. It's not my technical skills. It's the way I'm thinking that was getting in the way of me being able to do my thing. So it set me down this path to say, what is this thing inside my head? And I didn't even know there was a discipline called psychology. Just as a note, no one in my family went to college. And so I was a scrappy kind of kid trying to figure it out, no clue. And eventually I found my way into college and psychology. Once I was introduced to psychology, I was like, that's it. But then here's a problem, Morgan, is that the traditional study of psychology is about the brokenness of the human spirit. And that's the origins of psychology. It was born out of the medical model, which is studying dysfunction. And I couldn't get down with it. I just could not understand spending my life trying to understand dysfunction. And I found another subdiscipline inside of psychology, which is really the psychology and the science of excellence, and call it sport and performance psychology. And that's how it happened for me.
Interesting. Where'd you grow up in California?
Yeah. So the South Bay, Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach, Palos Verdes. Yeah.
When you were talking, I'm feeling like Dane Reynolds is very much like what you were describing as your free surfing syndrome, but yeah, interesting. Very cool. And how old were you when you had this realization? Like when you're in this competition?
I was 16. And 16. Again, I didn't know what psychology was, but I knew that my mind was not working in a way to help me.
You were just freezing in competition.
Basically, I couldn't think right in a way to be fully present. And that fully present thing has come to matter a lot, to so many people. And right now, stress levels are an all-time high for people. And the reason is not because of the external world. The reason is because we don't have the internal skills to meet the moment. And the demands of the moment right now are pretty intense. Yeah. And they feel incredibly intense if we don't have, like I said, the psychological skills to be able to pivot and adjust and eloquently meet the next moment.
Yeah. And so how does that play out in everyone's everyday life right now. And it sounds like there's a pandemic within a pandemic. So how do you see that playing out and what are some solutions?
So the external world around us is always changing. And our brains like novelty, but our brains also like pattern recognition and some semblance of normalcy. So it's an interesting contradiction, but the world and the model that we've been operating from has flipped on its head. And it's as if for the everyday living, it's as if the tide went out, I'm going to use another surfing metaphor, and the majority of us in working environments, we found out that many of us weren't wearing clothes. And so like, we feel like exposed, we feel like raw, like, oh my, and so there's no hiding now because the stress levels are so high. And what am I talking about? The hiding is that most people are struggling to meet the demands of the stressful environment that we're living in because we don't have the psychological skills. What do I mean by that? To be calm, to be grounded, to be present, to be confident, to be joyful, to live with purpose and meaning, as opposed to this other thing that's taking place, which is like fatigue, burnout, chronic stress, low engagement. I mean, Morgan, 38% of employees across the states, we'll just talk about the states for a moment, report being engaged at work. Can you imagine if 60% of, the team that I was with for a long time, the Seattle Seahawks that you mentioned, like if 60% of our athletes were engaged, we'd be laughed out of the league.
Yeah. No
one would want, and by the way, who wants to live disengaged?
Right.
Like we don't want that. And so anyways, I'm going on. This is the decade of the mind. And there's only three things we can train: our craft, our body, and our mind. And if you want to live a life of flourishing, of exploring your own potential, then psychological skills training must be part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you're not working one-on-one with people anymore, but say you were, like, where would you start with someone who's one of these, disengaged people today? Like, what's the first thing you would address?
So if we kind of double click under this beautiful science of psychology, the psychology of excellence, there's two basic camps that we would explore. The first is self-discovery, and the second is psychological skills. So we start with, like, who are you? Like, really, what is your purpose?
See how uncomfortable I got there? I was like, oh God, yeah, who are we? This is a big one.
Who am I? Yeah. I mean, it's an ancient question. But once you know who you are and you understand your first principles in life, nobody can give them to you, by the way. You have to say, like at some level, like, these are the ones that I orientate my life around, that once you know who you are, nobody can ever take it away. No external circumstance, and if you don't have the psychological skills to be about it, that's a whole different question. Mm-hmm. So first rock to get in the container is, what is your personal philosophy? What is your purpose in life? And when you use your imagination, what does the future look like for you? And so those are three on the self-discovery process. And then I'm going to be super clear. There's 5 factors that we work from. Okay. So self-discovery, mindset skills that I was just talking about, psychological framework, which is, okay, well, how do you make sense of the world around you? Recovery practices, and then mindfulness. Those are the 5 factors we work from. And underneath each of those are a set of skills that you can develop. And so first click, self-discovery, psychological skills. Second click is framework, recovery, and mindfulness.
Interesting. And this is all in your course, Compete to Create. Is that right? Is this kind of the outline of it?
Well, what happened in that online course that you're talking about, the Compete to Create, is that Coach Carroll and I, the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, it was our heading into our first Super Bowl. And he comes flying out of his office in the training facility, music's blaring like it is on a regular basis. And he comes out and he goes, Mike, can you feel what's happening? Now, he's a head coach of a National Football League, and I'm a sports psychologist. And he says, can you feel what's happening? And he's not talking about the music. That's just part of the fun of the culture. And I'm nodding my head, because what he's talking about is, can you feel what's happening where there's 63 athletes that are alpha competitors? They're pointing their nose in the same direction. There's 25 coaches pointing their nose in the same direction. And there's this electricity that's taking place where people are working together and they're extraordinarily talented. And so I was like, I'm nodding my head and I'm like, yeah. And he says, without skipping a beat, he says, do you think anyone outside of sport would be interested in what we're doing? And I'm thinking, I'm looking and I'm thinking, and he goes, let's just write it down. So what he was talking about is writing down his best practices, my best practices, and what we were doing together. We put it on the back of a napkin. We shared it with Microsoft. They were just at the transition of a new CEO, which Satya Nadella is their current CEO. And we shared it with them and they're like, hey, listen, this feels great. And so it is really about training the mind so that collectively we can be our best, so we can meet the demands of a stressful environment to perform well in life. And so that's where it started. And eventually, to meet the demand of interest, we had to scale it into an online course. And so we've got, I think, our best stuff in there. And so
very cool.
That's the course that you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was it like working with Pete Carroll and the Seahawks?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I learned so much. I hope I added, equally as what I've learned. And there is a progressive nature to that organization. Do things better than they've ever done before is one of our first principles. And it is a relationship-based approach. So we start with connecting to ourselves, then connecting to each other, because there's a fundamental understanding that to go and experience the extraordinary, to do things that have never been done and do it better than they've ever been done, requires relationships. It requires a connection. And so what happens for most businesses and or sporting franchises at the beginning of the year, Morgan, I think you'll recognize this. There's this vision setting, mission setting, doe-eyed, like, yeah, let's get it. This is going to be a great season. And we lock our arms and we give some sort of hoo-ha, let's go. And that's kind of the way stuff starts. And then as soon as it gets hard, we start to feel it, the stress, the pressure. People naturally will do something very predictable. They'll unlock their arms to save their own ass.
Interesting.
And so what we need to do is get ahead of that, go upstream and say, you need to know yourself. You need to know your partners, because when it gets hard, we have to stay together. And if you do that relationship-based stuff ahead of time, then we're more likely to stay bonded and connected as soon as it gets hard. And the greatest maritime, ocean-based people, they do not pray for calm waters, Morgan, as you would recognize. They pray to test, the strength of their anchor. And so in anything that's complicated and beautiful in business, the anchor is the fabric of our relationships. We can solve strategy. We can solve and pivot and adjust if we have each other to be able to bounce it off of and do the work together. Because the beautiful and extraordinary way of living, whether it's business or at home or sport, it's too complicated to do alone. And so we need each other. That's the simplicity of it.
Yeah. We talk about that a lot with Primal Kitchen, like just how relationships are still the most important thing. And at the end of the day, I feel like in this digital world we live in, like people just send an email and they've kind of forgotten like what you can actually get done when someone likes you. Like it sounds crazy, but it's pretty transformative. So you've worked with all these like super high performers. How does one know if they're a high performer, and how is that different from working with someone who's not a high performer? Like what traits do these people have in common? Like talk to me about these high performers.
I bet you know them. I bet you're living them. I mean, you guys have built something special. And so I'll start with the first axiom or fundamental principle is that the potential that's lying dormant inside most people is ridiculous. And so when I say most people, meaning that very few people are really pushing toward the edges of their capabilities. And so the untapped potential for most humans is a very deep reservoir. So that's different than, so I have a fundamental belief that there's so much more inside of us. And so that's the first kind of pass. The second is, hold on, let me finish that thought. To access that, it is what I've found, it's not working harder. It's not even working smarter. It's working from the inside out so that you can be present more often. Because why is being present so important? Because you get to the truth of something, you see actually what's taking place, and then you have these insights. And once you have insights, you're able to say, oh, that's how this works. And then, then you can pivot and adjust. Now, why am I saying that? Because you asked a question about high performance, which is, how do you know? Well, the way that you know is based on the outputs and the strength of your relationships. So if you're performing in a way that you're seeing growth or you are learning, that's the output, right? So that's one way to know. And but that in a vacuum is not enough, because if you're the top dog and you're performing everything that you need to perform in your business or whatever, but people don't want to be around you because you're the high earner that's got a bad kind of whatever, that's not high performance. So it's somebody that contributes to an environment based on the relationships where people around them are better because of them, and the output is ridiculous. It's high. And so having both of those, I think, is the hallmark of a modern high performer.
Yeah. And going back to the relationships piece, like, how do you build those relationships? Like at the beginning of the season, like what are those skills people could use in the workplace or maybe in their own family? I mean, there's all sorts of places you could take this.
Yeah. So we start with the relationship with yourself first. And so that's the first order of business. And most people really have not done that work. So what does that mean? Mindfulness is one of the key practices. And for the fidgety skeptic, it's hard to get into it. For the busy person, it's hard to do, but it is a ancient practice that's been around 2,600 years, and science that's coming out of the laboratories is, it's phenomenal. The science that is taking place about the change that happens from our brain perspective, from our psychology, from our neurochemistry. It is a radical practice that I couldn't imagine. So I would say the first order of business to start is with a mindfulness practice. The second is when you extend out from that and start working with others. It's as simple as knowing your philosophy. So let's call that step number 2, and then sharing it with others and being curious about their philosophy. So I was working with, this is public, so I'm not going to share something that's not public. Yeah, as a licensed psychologist, I want to make sure that that's clear.
I hear you.
Yeah, is that, and this was in his book. This was in Satya Nadella's book, the first 6 pages of his book. And again, he's the CEO of Microsoft. We were doing this work on philosophy. He stops his room, 16 people, 16 of his direct reports, call it the senior leadership team. And just for context, they have just under 200,000 people that report up to Satya eventually. So he stops the room when we get to this idea of knowing your philosophy. And he looks around the room and he says, we have a real challenge. The world is counting on our technology, and we need to get this right. And to do so, we need to know each other. So he says, Mike, I don't care if this takes like half of our day together. I want each of us to have the white space to get very clear about our first principles in life and then share it with each other, so that we can, when we go into those tested moments, we have a better sense of where we're coming from and what matters most to each person in this room. So we did that work. That would be step 2 and 2B. So step 2 is knowing your personal philosophy, writing it down, being very clear, 25 words or less, and then sharing that with others and being curious about, where they're coming from. So learning theirs. So that's step 1, 2, A and B.
And so what's like a personal philosophy? Like, give me an example of one.
Well, you have one already, Morgan. Okay? Like everybody has one, because it's informed the way you, what car you bought, what car you didn't buy, if you bought a bike instead of a car, if what watch you bought or didn't buy, the food choices that you make, whether you're choosing organic and or not, so you already have a philosophy that's at work. And so let me just give you, let me play a game. What do you think the Dalai Lama's was?
I don't know. You're putting me on the spot.
Yeah. It's good. Okay. Dalai Lama, loving kindness, something like that.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, let's do Jesus. What do you think Jesus's was? Love.
Love. Okay.
Yeah. Mother Teresa.
Just one word. These are very simple.
Hey, how about it? What do you think Michael Jordan's was?
Winning.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Competitive fire, winning, like finishing, like you could probably do the same for Kobe. You could probably do the same for LeBron, what do you think that Billie Jean King, what would her philosophy be? Probably something about equity, probably something about, having the privilege in life to compete. She's got that famous quote about pressure is a privilege.
Yep.
It was obviously a game changer for inclusion and equity. So, I think people that are incredibly influential, we know their philosophy because, or we could guess at it, because they have lined up their thoughts, their words, and their actions in every environment they go in. They line them up. So their thoughts are about, let's use Billie Jean King just for an example. She's thinking about let's go back to something more simple, right? Which is I don't know why I'm thinking about Jesus right now. Let's do that. Okay.
So Jesus it is.
Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah. It's a pretty good model that, what he was thinking about is you need to love people, and his words were about loving, and his actions were about loving people, and everywhere he went, even when it got him killed. And I think we could hold the truth for Dr. King, Malcolm X, fill in the blanks. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So you have one, you probably just haven't put it down into 1 to 25 words.
Yeah.
And the shorter, the more concise it is, the clearer it is for others to know what you're about. And then the clearer and easier it is for you to be about it on a regular basis. Now, once you get clear, the challenge is to go from clarity to conviction. So to be about it when it's hard to be about it. And what lives in between from clarity to conviction are mental skills. Because if you're clear of the woman you want to be, and you don't have the mental skills to be about it when people are rolling their eyes at you, or they, whatever the hostile, rugged, stressful environments are, it's only because we don't have the inner skills to be consistent with it. And I'm also talking about authenticity.
Yeah.
We trust people that feel authentic, that come from a logical place and are empathetic. And so those 3 factors roll up to trusting others. So there's a couple frameworks that I'm playing with there that I hope that is not too esoteric, but rather.
No, I like it. It's funny. Mark and I always said when we were running Primal Kitchen, at the beginning, we always said we had a strict no assholes policy. And if it wasn't fun, what was the point? So we kind of ingrained in the culture, subconsciously, this be nice to people, treat people with respect, and let's just have fun. We're here hoping to change the world's diet for the better. But if it's not fun and we're miserable, what's the point? So we better find a way to enjoy it. And I think that helped create, a culture that we've sustained years later. So it's interesting to think about.
And as a average consumer of your product, it feels like your brand represents that. So if the heartbeat is right, and what I'm talking about is the philosophy is clear, and then you live against that, then the quote unquote brand extension of it is authentic. But when we work backwards and we're what do we want our brand to be? But we don't map personally onto it. It's like a hollow Easter egg bunny, it's hollow, is it an egg bunny or whatever it is?
Yeah.
It's you poke it and there's nothing inside.
Yeah.
It's just,
we see a lot of that for sure. It's interesting. Yeah. So tell me, this is I'm getting very personal here, but imposter syndrome. Talk to me about imposter syndrome.
You recognize that too?
Yeah. I very much suffer from this.
Yeah, me too.
This is so selfish. Sorry to everyone listening, but I think this is an interesting one, especially for high performers who've had we had relatively quick success with Primal Kitchen. So I'm reading Elton John's autobiography, and he talks a lot about how quick success kind of created almost in a sense imposter syndrome in himself. And I could very much relate to that. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. One, as I say, welcome to the club.
Yeah.
If you're not leaning over your skis, going a little faster than you feel comfortable doing, and wondering when it's going to fall apart, and in imposter syndrome, the falling apart is, are they going to find out that I'm kind of out of control here? I'm making it up as I go. And I know I'm supposed to be able to turn on a dime, but I can't really do it right now. Okay. So this imposter syndrome is a fear of what other people will be thinking of me. And it's not necessarily fear that it's all going to go away. It's like they're going to find out. And so if you're not leaning over your skis the way I just described it, you're probably not getting close to being a high performer. So when I say welcome to the club, I mean, like, it's normal. It's part of it. And so it can also become one of the great constrictors of your potential is if you are over indexing on the fear of other people's opinions, FOPO.
Mm-hmm. I like it.
Yeah, right.
I haven't heard that one before. That's good.
FOPO. Yeah, we've all heard of FOMO, fear of missing out.
FOPO. This is even more
FOPO.
important. Yeah. Okay.
Fear of people's opinions is one of the great constrictors of one's potential.
Yeah.
It is, I'll go so far as to say it is the most salient, most important modern threat. So no longer do we have a saber tooth. Most people are dealing with the stressors of being kicked out of the tribe. And I say that with great humility that, like, in the United States, this last 18 months, we have 500,000 new homeless people. Most people's great fear is not being homeless, but there are some people that are deep right on the verge of it right now.
Yeah.
And so most people's fear of being kicked out of the tribe for not being good enough. And it's one of the great constrictors of human potential. So how do you deal with it? Recognize it, nod to it, and then make a fundamental commitment that what am I going to give more attention to? Trying to not look bad or to being my very best in this moment. And this is why the practice of mindfulness is so important, is because it is the practice of recognizing when you're away from the one thing that you're focusing on, call it your inhale or your exhale, and then gently, quickly refocusing back to the inhale once your mind is quote unquote distracted. So that's kind of the one welcome, make it normal. Know that your brain is, this ancient brain is trying to sort out danger all the time, 11-to-1 ratio. So your brain is picking up 11 quote unquote dangerous things to the one thing that is safe. And that's this ancient brain's job, is to find danger. So when you're sitting and kind of thinking in a conversation, it would be an 11-to-1 ratio where it's going to find something dangerous in the conversation, or dangerous when you're writing an email, or dangerous when you're driving. Like, that's what it's supposed to do.
Okay. So that's super helpful. We have this FOPO term, but what are the other things that are holding people back? Like the big things.
I think that is the biggest. The other is, I think people would be surprised about in elite sport, how much we prioritize recovery. And so people are tired right now. Like, there's a fatigue that's taking place in modern work. And when I first popped my head 7 years ago into elite business and big business, I was blown away that in elite sport, we spend so much time focusing on recovery because we know people are working towards their upper limits every day. So it's just bad science and it's bad form to not make sure, or to miss the importance of recovery. So in business, which is where most people spend most of their time, it's just not talked about right. It's like this thing that you do extra, you do later on your own. Where in elite sport, it's part of the rhythm of the day. So getting sleep right, and this sounds like a bit of a record player that's broken, but it's so important. And I'm happy to talk about some best practices there.
Yeah.
But just as a note, like, if you practice these best practices for 3 weeks and it still isn't working well, you might have a medical condition. And so it would be important and prudent to go get a medical workup to see if you've got a sleep disorder.
Interesting.
And
like
then the other
apnea or insomnia or something. Okay.
And there's lots of different forms, restless leg syndrome. It could be environmental. It could be the way you prepare yourself to sleep, your mind and your body and your brain, or it could be something medical. So if you want, I can double click on that, or we can talk about something right down your lane, which is the importance of nutrition.
Yeah, I think both of those. Give me your top sleep hacks, and then I want to hear your philosophy on nutrition.
Yeah. So 7 to 9 hours for 90% of the brains is average. And so again, like, that's a lot of sleep, and most people are not getting consistency on 7. And so 8, there's a reason 8 is such a popular number. Now, all that being said, here's some of the best practices. get your eyes and your brain attuned to first light and last light. So as soon as you can on sunrise, get your brain attuned to it. So go outside. And again, we're not looking into the sun, but we're just getting our brains attuned to sunrise and sundown. So first light, last light. That helps to balance the circadian rhythm, the part of our brain that is looking for, priming for sleep and wake. The other is making sure that early in the day that we are cutting coffee and caffeine and teas or whatever stimulants that you're drinking by noon or 2 o'clock, somewhere in that range. We want to make sure that on the sleep side that we're getting ourselves at least 90 minutes to prepare to fall asleep. And there's a whole host of things that people can do there. But basically, we're de-stimulating our environment, turning down some lights. We know the science and the art of blue light, so maybe there's some glasses or whatever, but just de-stimulating our environment. Literally turning down lights is important. Starting to flip off technology as much as you can. And then as you're kind of getting ready for bed, the more routine you have, the better. And so if you pair your pillow with sleep, as opposed to reading or eating or answering emails or whatever, like you prepare yourself when you get into bed that it's time to sleep, your brain will pair that, just like Pavlov's dog. Mm-hmm. And so that's an important part. There's a priming to get to that. And then if you don't fall asleep, this is kind of an interesting, most people struggle. They'll fall asleep because they're exhausted, but then they wake up on the first or second cycle, which is 90 to 180 minutes later. And if you wake up and you can't get back to sleep, like kind of within a few moments, then you might want to start over. Let's call it like 5 to 7 minutes if you can't fall back asleep. You might want to just get up and go back to the priming, which is keep the lights off, but brush your teeth without toothpaste, because you've had thousands of repetitions of when you brush your teeth at night, hopefully you do, that that's part of the readiness to get to sleep.
Interesting.
And then, the second way to maybe think about it is that, again, if you can't fall asleep or you wake up and you can't get back to sleep, if you don't want to get up, the worst thing you can do is kind of entertain, oh my God, I can't fall asleep. I got something to do in the morning. I'm like, and your mind is thumping and running in that way. Just put your feet to sleep. That's it. Just focus on putting your feet to sleep, and then put your calf muscles to sleep. Again, if you're fortunate to have feet and calves, and I mean that sincerely. Yeah. And then put your upper legs to sleep, and then put your glutes to sleep, and then put your back to sleep. And before you know it, you're like, forget about it. Yeah. And then the kind of whole thing just shuts down. So
I do that one with my toddler. It's very helpful, like a body scan. Yeah. I'm like, I got to teach him this because no one teaches these poor kids, and then they're just stressed out all the time. So I'm trying to help him learn how to wind down, but I do like massages where we start with the feet and talk about how thankful we are for our feet and playing and, all those things. And then he falls asleep quickly. So, and now he says like, Mom, can you do the body scan? He really looks forward to it. So that's a great one. I've been using that one for a while, but
how old is your child?
So he's almost 3.
Yeah. There you go. So now's a really good time to also introduce breathing. And you probably already have, but one of the ways you can do is kind of put like a light stuffed animal on their stomach. And then you just like, okay, let's have it go in and go out, just kind of up and down, and while they're laying down. And so getting the breathing, the connection between breathing and relaxing at an early age is really quite dynamic.
Yeah. So this was for later in the podcast, but I want to get into it now. And then we'll go back to the nutrition, but parenting, like how has your parenting philosophy changed, you think, as a result? Or like, what are you doing that's different from other parents? And how do you, because you have kids, child?
I have one. Yeah, I have it. Yeah. He just turned 13.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. I think the parenting bit is, one is everything that I just talked about. I'm working on living it. And so being present, I think, is a really important parenting component, which is being fully present with what you're doing and who you're doing it with is kind of the biggest gift you can give another person. And there is so much that pulls your attention, my attention, adults' attention, all the worries of today, as well as the need to feel stimulated. And sometimes talking to a 3-year-old or 13-year-old is not the most stimulating thing, So, so being fully present when you're with them is a big gift to give them. And it does so much for their sense of worth and value and self-esteem and self-efficacy. And so the second thing is I only, that's too strong of a word. The majority of my language is focused on supporting and challenging him on things that he has control over. And so he's playing sport right now. And so when the car ride home is why most kids leave sport.
Interesting.
Yeah, because the parents, well-intended, are talking about or celebrating things that are not totally in their control. Like, I saw you score. That was so amazing. It's well-intended, but the score is not something that is 100% under their control. And so, and or the critiquing, is really the other part of that car ride home. Like, and smart parents are really slick. They're like, so when you missed that goal, what was happening? Or, like, were you tired? Whatever. Like, it's super slippery, and kids are like, what the F are we doing here?
Yeah, like, totally. Rightfully so.
And then the other parts of the conversations are like silence. Because pissed off about whatever. So the car ride home is really a great way to say things like, I love seeing you try to figure this thing out. How was it out there for you? Or what'd you figure out? What was the most fun? What was the hardest part? And so you're talking about things that are ultimately under their control.
Yeah.
And if you do want to reinforce something, you say like, oh my goodness, in the third quarter, when you stepped on the gas and you were like, you ran down that ball, that was like amazing. And it's 100% under their control, their effort, their attitude.
Yeah. And not the way,
and so that I think that's a really important thing. The second framework is that because I've been around literally the best of the best in sport, and let's just use sport for an example right now. The coaches and the athletes know how hard it is, how long it takes to get good at something, which means if you want to live a fruitful life, love some stuff that you do. Love the way it feels to do whatever it is you're doing. They are not pushing their children.
Yeah.
They're the quiet ones on the sideline. They know some stuff now.
Yeah.
And what they know more than anything is this is a long game.
Yeah.
I want my child to fall in love with the thing that they want to fall in love with. And so that's a framework, so I'm more on the sidelines, kind of hanging out in the back and just wanting to love watching my child try to figure something out.
Yeah, that's good advice. Shut your mouth.
Shut your mouth.
Shut your mouth on the sidelines. Yeah, we all know that parent. How does it come into like marriage? How does this play out? And I mean, I can't imagine being married to like a psychologist. That just
oh my God, could you imagine if my wife were here right now?
Your poor wife, man. No, but how does this help or hurt? I'm curious.
Yeah. So early days, you asked this early in the question. I didn't avoid it, but I didn't answer it directly because you asked for what are the traits or the skills of high performers. And I can go back to that, but I wanted to stay principle-based first. And on the marriage bit, people ask me all the time, like, what are the traits of the greats? And I say, and I used to answer it. And again, I will answer it.
Yeah.
Right now, it's like having my wife is the reason that I'm able to kind of launch the way I launch and explore the way I explore. And I'm not saying that there's anything special about me, but it is the foundation of that relationship that pays dividends. And so I think that that's one of the core components for people is their community and their intimate love that they experience in their life. It's not the savage lone wolf. It is not that. The lone wolf, as we recognize, is the one that's been kicked out of the tribe.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's it like to be married? If she was here, she'd say, stop your psychobabble. Like, she's Cuban and she gives me every ounce of the flavor of,
I love
it. That way. So, but how does it pay dividends? I think, again, being present is the one that we work on most. And so solving together is the second, and it doesn't mean we don't argue, but we're working on being present and solving together as opposed to like being right. So
yeah. Got to let go of that for sure. Okay. I have a few just quick questions because I know we're almost out of time. What are you most excited about that's happening right now in health and wellness? Like anything really?
The conversation. I think the conversation is people are fatigued. There's chronic stress is a real thing and they're looking for solutions. four of the big buckets are sleep, nutrition, including hydration, but nutrition, moving well, and then thinking well. Those are four of the big buckets. And so people are looking for ways to feel better. And while the quick instant gratification of high sugar, high fat, kind of thing is fading away now, people know that this is a game of stability and durability. And so nutrition is part of it. So that's one of the reasons that I'm excited about it. Health and wellness is about micro choices.
Yeah.
And nutrition is a micro choice.
Yeah. Mark always says your life's made up of like a gazillion little choices that add up over time and make a big difference. So give me your quick nutrition philosophy. Very quick.
I mean, colorful foods, Skittles and M&Ms and
excluded.
And so, so colorful foods on a plate, that's a big deal for me and my family. And I see it with athletes, that are switched on. I'm much more interested in a plan that can work rather than something extreme that kind of comes and goes. Healthy fat is a big deal for us. Quality protein. And so, stuff that is sourced well. And so organic, wild, stuff like what you guys are doing and basing your products around. Hydration is a big deal. And so making sure that the cells are properly, from a brain perspective, that the cells are watered well. And I'm a huge component of taking science and evidence and customizing and tailoring your approach. So the first basic is knowledge. And so getting with somebody that's very knowledgeable about nutrition. Level up is taking a blood draw to look at unique markers for your unique body. And then next level up is making some choices based on that. Next level up is having somebody support you in cooking for you. And that's kind of what happens in elite sport. There's nutrition and then all the way up to customized nutrition plans based on your unique blood draw. But for, it sounds like a lot, but the dividend is ridiculous. It's like between $750 and $1,500 having a blood draw to look at exactly what your unique markers are so you can make an informed decision on your life about what micro choices to make. And again, it's a lot, but the dividends are.
Is there like a company that's doing these kind of blood draws? Or are you just doing this through doctors? Like what blood markers are you guys looking for?
Yeah. So, it's funny, Morgan, I know you know the answer, but that's clever.
No, I mean, I know one answer, but I don't know if it's the same answer you have. I'm curious. If there's someone else I need to send my blood to, please tell me. That's
So if you go to your typical MD, they do not look at the markers that I'm talking about, the performance nutrition-based markers. Mm-hmm. So there's things like ferritin, there's things like vitamin D, most MDs don't look at, your omega profile, I'm really interested in tryptophan and tyrosine because they are the precursors to serotonin and dopamine. So there's a host of things that we can look at. Nirvanic acid, oleic acid, and omegas are kind of the substrate that coats and helps your nervous system fire optimally. So optimal nerve, conductance is really important for brain performance. It's important for movement performance as well. So if you're low on oleic acid or nirvanic acid or omegas, the sheathing around your nerves is potentially compromised. So it's an easy upgrade there. So again, and then we look at things like what are the supplements that will support your nutrition? And most people do need some sort of supplementation. Not all, but most people do.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there a certain doctor you're working with in LA to do all this fun stuff that I need to know about?
Yes, there's a couple. And I'm hesitant to give their name out because last time I did this, it kind of broke their
and then they can't take any new clients. All right. I'm going to ask you for that offline then. You're going to have to fill me in, but very interesting. I'm sure any functional medicine doctor could do something like that. There's a really cool app called Zoe. I interviewed the founder of that company that they're doing like microbiome testing, blood sugar and blood fat response. And they're doing all these personalized stuff for people. It's $59 a month. So for someone who wants like a more accessible version of that, I think that's an interesting tool.
Yeah. And your answer is correct. Most modern practitioners from a health perspective, not traditional MDs, they might not know this stuff, but a switched on nutritionist or an RD that is in the nutrition world. Like if they're switched on, they're going to do that work. So you'd find someone local to you. And Inside Tracker is doing a nice job as well, you know? And so I don't know if you've seen them, but they're doing a nice job.
Okay. We'll have to check them out. All right. Favorite books for people on this journey?
Favorite, ones that stand up for the ages. So kind of First Pass is this, you know, the stuff that's been around for a long time. So I think that those are really interesting. And I'm a fan of, I think you mentioned earlier, like autobiographies of the greats.
Yeah.
I love those. You get a peek inside. Yeah. I think they're so good. And then I'm, you know, mastery is a really important concept for me. So I want to study masters. And that's why the autobiographies are really important. And the books that have been stood up for ages, anything that's really classic, you know? And then if there's something modern, you know, this is not necessarily modern, but Bruce Lee's writings on his philosophy are really good. I think that there's a lot there to pull apart.
I love it. Okay. Last one, because I know we're almost out of time, but what is something about you that no one knows or that people wouldn't know who are listening to this podcast? When people eat and I can hear them eating, it is absolutely a skin crawler for me. Oh, really? That's that's a problem like my pregnant friends have. I'm going to tell you that right now. Like all my pregnant friends are like, oh my God, if I can hear someone chewing, I'm going to throw up at this table. That's interesting. So there's your pet peeve. Now we know. So if we ever find you at lunch, we know to chew with our mouth shut. We got it.
Yeah. You know, it's a moment to practice patience for sure, but there's an actual psychological condition. There's some people that are really sensitive to the smacking and the sound of another person eating. And so I think I fit in that, you know?
Yeah, I like it. I have very.
Hey, Morgan, listen, I know we're up, but you can't just ask that and me not ask it in return. Like,
what's something about me no one knows? Let's see. God, there's like inappropriate stories I probably shouldn't say on this podcast. I got my yoga certification. I lived in South America for 2.5 years off $10,000 a year. And had like the worst reverse culture shock ever when I came back. I was like 20 something. All my friends were, you know, spending like $100 at the bars every night in downtown Chicago. And I had been living off like $100 a month and I could not figure out how to get myself back into society in the US. I actually got involved with my dad's therapist from when he was my age. His name's David Roadhouse. He's in Chicago. He's Buddhist. I don't know. He's probably.
Wait, you were dating your dad's therapist?
No. I got involved with him, meaning like I started seeing him as a patient.
I'm joking.
Not dating him. He's 72. He's a professional triathlete. Actually, he's like, he wins the senior triathlon competition every year. There's a lot of similarities. But I started seeing him and that was like very, I would say, transformational for me. He sees a lot of, I wasn't at the time. At the time I was unemployed, living at home, 25, but he has a lot of patients that are successful entrepreneurs, like Richard Melvin, who started the Let Us Entertain You restaurant group in Chicago, or the guy who founded Two Buck Chuck. He's got a lot of like really cool clients like that. I just lucked out with this cool high performance Buddhist 70-something-year-old professional triathlete therapist who actually ended up marrying my husband and I, but yeah, I'm a big fan. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was great. Can you give everyone the lowdown? I'm sure they're dying to know like how they can absorb more from your intelligent brain. So how do people like find you? What can they get involved in? Give us the pitch.
Thank you. Yeah. So the best place is the Finding Mastery podcast, where I have conversations with extraordinary minds about their psychology, their best practices. So it's a Finding Mastery podcast is the best place to go. And then social is at Michael Gervais, Gervais, and that's on all the handles. So those would be the best places to go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was a pleasure. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.